I guess I would say this involves some personal knowledge and some personal awareness. But there was an episode where you had a sudden emergence of a filament from the skin. I mean sudden. And the filament was 2 to 3 inches long. And it's a hard thing to describe because it's very anecdotal. But I would say that the circumstances, the physical circumstances, and we could call it the stress conditions and circumstances, it appeared as though it may have precipitated this event. And all I can say is peculiar. I don't deal with anecdotal things on too many cases, but your question is well taken, and I'm just trying to let you know that first of all, yes, it's very feasible to me. The second is I have a sort of an anecdotal sense that such things may be in existence. The question I would actually ask here, the hypothesis that I actually have there is whether or not conditions of stress or emotional distress as well as physical stress or mental stress may be, let's say, more precipitating or enhancing to activation of this particular organism. That's, as definite as I can be right now, and I don't know it's not complete, but that's what I can offer you right now. It's a great question, though, and I'd say to all of us, get to work and start doing your studies and get them out there so we can all see. Let's go on to this next one. Oh, and by the way, you might recall, some of you might recall, the amount of work that I have done studying the ELF, the extremely low frequency situation. I probably have 2 to 3 years of work devoted to that subject. So there was a reason that I was doing that work, okay? And it has to do with HARP technology, which is what you're asking about there also. This is the next question coming in. Is it related to HARP? There is a great body of work, 2 to 3 years of work, probably 24 papers, which the primary focus is on the detection. It's not a matter of just questioning whether or not something might exist. Those papers are on the repeated detection of unexplained, extremely low frequency radiation, which by all appearances, there's no way at this point I have ever been able to come up with any natural source for those particular signals that have been detected. The fundamental frequency, if you look at those papers, is 4 hertz. Okay? Spent a lot of time building equipment, starting from scratch. I'm not an electrical engineer by any means, but I learned how to build and modify a circuit, because that's a hard thing to measure, by the way. ELF is a bit tricky. But I got very seriously into that because something showed up, and the deeper I dug into it, the more that it showed up and the more that it repeated. And you will find numerous papers on the detection of ELF frequency, or the fundamental frequency of 4 hertz. Now, the reason I can come up with no explanation for that is that even if you are dealing with what's called the Schumann frequency, which is the resonant frequency of the Earth itself. Frequency is how would you say it? It's a function of dimension, of size. And everything resonates at a certain frequency related to its physical size. And if you figure out that relationship for the Earth itself, you will come up with a number, and that number is roughly in the order of 8 hertz, and that's called the frequency, the fundamental frequency of the Earth itself. Well, the reason I have a problem with what I found is that if you have a fundamental frequency of 4 hertz, there's nothing on the Earth big enough to justify its existence, including the Earth itself. And this is my problem. And a great deal of work has been done on that. And the reason that work was done, and again, when you start asking these questions, they actually just start expanding. But the reason that work was done on the ELF was because there is an effect upon the human body if it is subjected to ELF frequencies, ELF radiation, because our bodies work within that range, at least the mind. The human mind operates roughly between 0 and 100 hertz. So if you look at my graphs of those tables, you'll see a fundamental frequency of 4 hertz, and it'll be stepped. It'll be 4, 8, 12, 16, an exact multiple. And at this point, it looks completely artificial. Furthermore, if you look at a paper I did in terms of trying to determine the direction or source, let's say call it the source of that signal. Everything has a source somewhere. And then when I worked to try and find out where that source was coming from, I was led. It was quite a fascinating process. And it points out our errors, and sometimes we make assumptions. And if you're truly honest in your work, a lot of times those assumptions will just completely be demolished to the floor. And what happened here was I had a certain assumption about the way this particular antenna would work, and so I had sort of an expectation that such and such might occur, and it ended up being basically 90 degrees to the side of what I was expecting. And when you actually dig into the physics of that particular situation, the signal that I was using, the antenna that I had built, actually had properties such that the signal would have been 90 degrees off if I knew what I was doing. And the conclusion of that paper is that the direction of that signal was matched exactly with the magnetic field lines of the Earth. And this is what HARP is about. Again, I won't say that it is HARP. I'm just saying it matches. What I found matches a process that uses the magnetic field lines of the Earth to propagate its energy. And if you study HARP, that's exactly what it's about. So you can see where that question went a little bit, and we actually just get started as we're talking about these. So let's try and go on to the next one. And I'll take a little break there and just make sure everybody's still hearing okay. And is this whole idea that we're trying tonight, is it working? If you can just give me a couple of responses, that helps. Make sure I'm not talking to a wall. Okay, well, I'm hearing one anyway, so hopefully it's more than that. Great, so there's great. All right, so it looks like it's working tonight. That's great. Now, let's go on to another one here. Let's take this one. Have you studied organisms with response to, and by the way, the questions are open to anything, but obviously we're having a focus here on the Morgellons, but we see that there are relations between this and the aerosol operations, at least from the standpoint of my research. So all the questions are fully justified in that sense. The question is, have you studied organisms? This comes from Mac. Or have you studied organisms' response? Have you studied organisms' response to radiation, light, and sound? Yes, to a degree. To the level that's needed, not even close. There, like I was saying, but there is so much to be done. Imagine having an hour or two a week to try and figure out what is it you're going to choose this time to do your work on. And then also realize that some of these cultures that I've been involved with, some of them have taken anywhere from 2 to 3 months to evolve. I have a process now that looks like it's a lot more efficient and more direct, but sometimes I'm waiting 2 to 3 months to get feedback on one question that I have. That's not uncommon. A lot of these questions take months to even begin to address. So when you're asking that question, then you have to start asking, okay, what are you going to pick, right? We're talking about, let's say we're talking about the electromagnetic spectrum alone, right, which is a continuous range. Questionable whether or not the limits of that have even been established as far as I would be concerned. But you're talking about basically infinite choices is my point. So then the question is, how do you know what to choose and why are you going to choose it? And one of the first things that I try to do in my work is I generally try to establish a rationale, some kind of reasoning process before I do the work. I could do it by chance, but it's not very efficient for me. Given how limited the time is, I try as much as I can to have some kind of thought process before I engage in a particular research. So when you're talking about the frequency game and radiation, this type of thing, imagine the difficulty you have in that you have to try to come up with what is your rationale for selecting a frequency out of some continuum.